The bells stopped that night, not from silence, but from surrender. Fire crawled down the mountains of Thessaly, and 22 nuns stood watching their world burn, knowing the empire was coming for them. But what the Ottomans found inside those walls was faith that would not kneel. In the first 8 seconds, you should have felt something break inside you, not a sound but a promise undone. The bell chapel is a heartbeat, and when it dies, a threshold opens. High above the olive groves of Thessaly, smoke rose like a prayer answered the wrong way. They came not as men looking for gold, but as an empire hunting a symbol. Conquer the place that holds the story, and you break the people who remember it. You are here to learn why silence sometimes hides the loudest truths. Picture 22 women in habits, no shields, no swords, holding a relic that had weathered a century of storms. The abbess, Eleni of Lissa, stands with a silver crucifix and tells her sisters, "Keep your vow inside your heart so they cannot take it." Eaten by the night, when the gates fell, the empire did not simply defeat them, it performed a different violence, erasure. The cannon that shattered the wooden doors was a sentence written in iron. They wanted to show that the cross itself could be conquered. They wanted proof, not of riches but of submission, a parchment of broken names. Under torchlight, the soldiers expected screams and got something their training had not prepared for. The nuns began to sing. Every video here is more than just content. It's crafted with love, talent, and the drive to create something meaningful. Subscribe this channel only if you're ready to see what they swore you'd never know. They erased this from history. We're putting it back. Subscribe before it disappears again. And press the bell icon also to get latest video at your door. Picture the captain watching the abbess offered mercy in exchange for renouncing what she loved. He promised life if she would speak another name. She did not bargain. "I have already given my life," she said. That divides men into 2 kinds, those who can be moved and those who must be shown the cost of mercy. He left to his men. What followed would be softened or omitted in polite records. This is not martyrdom dressed as romance. It is a manual of power. How institutions erase identity without burning paper. How slow attrition becomes authority. They would take bodies, names, memory, turn witnesses into footnotes. The method is quiet, bureaucratic. It is familiar. Rebrand, rename, reassign. Faith, they discovered, can be chipped away not by fire alone, but by being made irrelevant, anonymous, inconvenient. The convent's hymns were meant to die with the stones. Instead, a small, stubborn song became proof that something deeper than law or army resists assimilation. The rabbit hole opens now. By dusk, the air above Thessaly shimmered red, not from sunset, but from fire. The convent that once smelled of candle wax and bread now bled smoke into the sky. The walls cracked like ribs. Statues of saints crumbled to chalk beneath the thunder of iron. The Ottomans moved through the ruins with deliberate calm, their boots echoing over shattered pews. The sisters were dragged from corners once meant for prayer, their veils torn, their rosaries scattered across the stone. The silver crucifix that had hung above the altar lay half buried in ash, its face blackened but unbroken. In the courtyard, the survivors were gathered. 22 women bound by rope, the wind tugging at their veils like ghosts desperate to free them. The captain rode forward, his armor reflecting the flames. Around them, the empire's banners rippled crimson and gold, a kingdom's pride born from conquest. The sisters stood barefoot, their habits torn by smoke and dirt. None cried out. They stared not at their captors, but at the chapel's burning door, the last threshold between sanctity and surrender. A soldier stepped closer and struck the abbess to her knees.
She fell, clutching the cross still hot from the fire. He told her to kneel to the empire, to the crescent, to the name that ruled from Constantinople to the edge of the desert. But she did not move. Her lips moved instead, a prayer so soft it drowned beneath the roar of burning timbers. Another blow followed. Still she prayed. The captain signaled his men to stop. Her defiance unsettled even the victors. Night fell heavy. Smoke mixed with mist, turning the mountains into shadows. The convent bells, melted into silence, lay in a pool of bronze at the soldiers' feet. The sisters were forced to march down the hill toward the valley road, hands bound, eyes hollow from exhaustion. Behind them, the place that had been their world collapsed into embers. Not one looked back. The last sound from the ruins was the wind passing through the hollow where the bell once hung, a ghostly note that seemed to follow them into the dark.
The march began before dawn. The sky was still bruised with smoke when the column moved down the mountain path. 22 women in torn habits surrounded by Ottoman horsemen. The cold bit into their bare feet, the stones cutting through skin softened by years of cloister life. The sound of chains clinking against saddles marked their rhythm, not steps of the faithful, but of captives being erased. At the front rode the captain, silent, his face unreadable beneath his red turban. Behind him, the sisters stumbled in silence, bound 2 by 2, their breath misting in the early chill. By midday, the sun turned cruel. The heat pressed against their faces, drawing sweat and salt into their wounds. When one of the younger nuns fell, the guards barked orders, but another sister bent down, lifting her with shaking arms. They moved together, slower but unbroken. The captain watched, but did not intervene. He had seen armies collapse under less. Here there was something inhuman. Not strength, but conviction that would not die even as bodies failed. At night, they were herded into an abandoned granary along the roadside. The soldiers lit torches and laughed among themselves, drinking from flasks, tossing scraps of bread into the dirt. The sisters huddled together, sharing the crusts, whispering the same psalm until the sound faded into sleep. The abbess was gone, her fate sealed at the convent, yet her final words clung to them like breath in the dark. If you cannot hold the cross, hold each other. When dawn came again, they walked. 7 days of dust and thirst stretched before them. Villagers along the way stared but did not speak. The empire's banners had already passed through. Mercy had no witness left. On the 7th evening, they reached the coast at Vols. There the sea waited, wide, endless, indifferent. Ottoman galleys rocked in the harbor, black silhouettes against a blood-orange sky. The guards ordered them aboard. Shackles replaced rope. The oarsmen stared, not at captives, but at relics of a faith about to vanish into the horizon. As the ship pulled away from shore, the mountains of Greece shrank behind them, swallowed by fog and empire. The voyage began beneath a sky without stars. The sea was black glass, broken only by the oars cutting through it. Shackled to the benches, the sisters sat among criminals, slaves, and the condemned, their white habits now stained with salt and blood. The smell of sweat, tar, and iron filled the air. Above them, the ship's overseer, Yusuf Aga, paced with a ledger in hand, marking not names but numbers. To the empire, they were cargo. 22 souls recorded between crates of silk and jars of spice. Days blurred into one another. The wind rose, then died. Hunger hollowed their faces until bone showed beneath the skin. When storm struck,
Water poured through the deck grates, soaking them in freezing rain. They prayed in whispers, the rhythm of their words lost to the crashing waves. One by one, their voices grew hoarse. Only the youngest, Sister Magdalena, still spoke the psalms aloud. Her voice trembled, fragile, but the men chained beside her, Greeks, Serbs, and Venetians, fell silent to listen. For a few moments the sea seemed to still. On the fifth night, lightning tore across the horizon. The mast shuddered. A wave swept over the side, drenching the women in seawater and blood from the deck above. 2 sisters were torn from their seats when the chain snapped. The soldiers shouted, but it was too late. The ocean swallowed them without sound. The survivors lowered their heads. No screams, no wailing, only a single line whispered by Magdalena, "The Lord is my light in the deep." When morning broke, the sea was gone. The sea lay calm, too calm, stretching endless and gray. The women's eyes burned from salt and sleeplessness. The horizon shimmered faintly, a mirage at first, then the faint outline of domes and towers. Constantinople, the city of the world's desire. The ship glided toward it like an offering. The nuns sat motionless, their chains clinking softly as the oars slowed. Above them, gulls circled, pale wings against the gold of dawn. None spoke. They knew what waited beyond that harbor was not salvation, but judgment.
When the ship entered the Bosphorus, the morning light struck the domes of Constantinople, turning them to gold. The city seemed to breathe, minarets rising like spears, smoke curling from 1,000 fires. From the deck the sisters watched in silence as oarsmen slew their strokes and the harbor swallowed them whole. Dockhands shouted in Turkish and Arabic, their voices lost in the din of markets and soldiers. For the nuns, it was like stepping into another world, one where their God was only a whisper among a million other prayers. Guards marched them off the ship, chains clattering against the stones of the quay. Locals gathered to stare, merchants, beggars, children, watching pale women in torn habits being led through the city's veins like trophies of conquest. The air was heavy with spice and smoke, but beneath it was the metallic tang of blood. The sisters' feet left faint marks of red across the marble as they climbed the road toward the palace quarter. They passed under arched gates carved with verses from the Quran, into courtyards of fountains and gardens. The sound of water echoed against the marble walls, mocking their thirst. Above them rose the great dome of Hagia Sophia, once their own faith's crown, now transformed into a symbol of the empire that had broken them. One of the younger nuns gasped when she saw the cross atop its peak had been replaced by a crescent. The abbess was gone, but her words lingered like a presence. If they take the world from you, keep heaven hidden inside. By midday, the column reached the imperial council courtyard, the Divani Humayun. There, before the steps of power, they were ordered to kneel. The Grand Vizier sat in judgment, flanked by scribes whose pens glinted in the light. No priests, no mercy. Each name was written down, then crossed out and replaced with a number. They were told the Sultan offered mercy, a new name, a new life, if they would speak a new faith. The sisters looked at one another but said nothing. The silence stretched until even the guards shifted uneasily. Then the vizier gave the order, "Take them below." The marble doors closed behind them with a sound that did not echo. It swallowed them. The light of the city, the last trace of freedom, was gone. The descent into the palace underworld began through a narrow passage cut from cold stone. The air changed as they moved, damp, heavy, and silent. Torches hissed against the walls, revealing corridors that twisted like veins beneath the empire. The guards said nothing. Their boots struck the ground in rhythm, guiding the sisters deeper into the dark. When they reached the final chamber, the iron door was closed behind them with a hollow clang that sounded like the end of memory. The room was low and windowless. A single slit in the ceiling allowed a thin thread of light to fall on the floor, just enough to mark day from night. The walls were slick with moisture. In the corner stood a wooden basin of water and a pile of coarse garments, the only things left to them. Their habits were taken, their rosaries stripped away. What once marked them as brides of faith was now burned or stored among spoils. When the guards left, the silence returned like a living thing. Days turned to weeks. The sisters were divided into small groups, each sent to serve in different corners of the palace. Some scrubbed the marble floors, some carried water to the upper halls, and others worked in the heat of the kitchens where they were not allowed to speak. Their hands blistered, their bodies weakened, but their eyes remained fixed on the rhythm of the muezzin's call, not as followers, but as witnesses of passing time. At night, they were herded back into their quarters below the gardens. There, in the dim glow of a single oil lamp, they gathered close, whispering fragments of prayer they remembered from the convent, lines broken by exhaustion, but bound by faith. Sister Magdalena traced a small cross into the dust with her finger, careful to brush it away before dawn. Sister Damaris whispered the names of the dead. Their faith had no altar now, only breath and will. The guards believed the darkness would bend them. Instead, it made them quiet, still, and unyielding. When food was scarce, they shared. When beatings came, they endured. In the hollow beneath the empire's splendor, their defiance took shape, not in shouts, but in the refusal to forget who they were. And above their heads, the palace slept, unaware that beneath its marble floors, a different kind of kingdom was being born.
Winter came without warning. The air in the underground chambers turned sharp and metallic, biting through the thin linen that replaced their habits. Frost gathered along the walls like pale veins. The sisters slept huddled together for warmth, their breath forming clouds that vanished into the dark. The palace above glittered with feasts and firelight, but beneath its marble, the world had narrowed to stone, silence, and endurance. Each dawn began the same way. The iron door creaked open, guards barked orders, and the women were led to their stations. They moved through tunnels that smelled of oil and smoke, carrying water, sweeping ashes, feeding furnaces that warmed the halls of men who would never know their names. The rhythm of servitude became the rhythm of survival. They no longer counted days. They counted prayers, whispered beneath their breath before the guards could silence them. When one of the older sisters collapsed from exhaustion, the guards left her where she fell. The others were ordered to keep working. Sister Magdalena knelt beside the body long after the footsteps faded. She closed the woman's eyes, whispered a psalm, and tore a strip from her own garment to cover her face. That night she did not speak, but when the guards had gone, she drew a small mark on the wall, a cross with a single flame above it. The others understood. A soul had left them, and a light had joined the darkness. Weeks passed, and the whispers began. Stories among the palace servants about strange women in the lower corridors who never spoke, never begged, never broke. Some said they were mad, others said they were holy. The guards began to fear their silence. Even punishment brought no cries, no pleas. The vizier ordered the rations cut, convinced hunger would do what cruelty could not. Yet each night the sisters gathered in secret corners, using the faint glow of the furnaces to see one another's faces. They prayed without words, their lips moving in rhythm, their hands clasped tight. In that silence, something began to change. Not a miracle, not salvation, but a bond carved from pain itself. And though the empire did not know it yet, beneath its greatest palace, 21 women were learning how to turn captivity into communion.
Spring returned to the empire, but in the chambers below, the seasons no longer mattered. The air never warmed, the sun never reached them. What changed was the sound. Footsteps above, laughter, music drifting faintly through cracks in the ceiling. The sisters listened to the life they no longer had, and it made their prayers quieter, more secret. The guards had grown used to their stillness. They came less often now, only to drop food or count bodies. One evening, after the torches were extinguished, Sister Magdalena discovered a hollow behind a loose stone near the corner of the chamber. Inside it lay an old clay shard, sharp at the edge, forgotten by the masons centuries before. She held it as if it were a relic, its cold weight anchoring her in the dark. That night, while the others slept, she carved a small cross into the wall, faint, almost invisible. When dawn came, the mark was covered by a shadow, safe from prying eyes. It was the first thing they had created in months that belonged to them. Days later, more carvings appeared. Tiny scratches at first, a fish, a flame, a single Latin word half remembered, lux. The sisters took turns keeping watch, while others etched their signs into the stone. Each mark was a name, a prayer, a reminder that they still existed beyond the numbers assigned to them. The walls slowly filled with these symbols, a secret language that only they could read. The youngest among them, barely more than a girl, began collecting candle wax from the trays she cleaned in the upper kitchens. With the stub of a burned wick, she shaped a small flame and hid it inside the hollow with the shard. It became their altar. Each night, when the palace fell silent, they gathered around that faint glow and recited the only words that mattered. Light in darkness. Light in darkness. Rumors soon reached the guards that the foreign women were whispering again, that strange songs could be heard beneath the stone. The overseer came down with torches, ordered the chambers searched, but found nothing. The flame had already been hidden, the marks covered with soot. When he left, the women waited in silence, listening to his footsteps fade. Then, from the shadows, Sister Magdalena whispered, "They can blind the eyes, but not the soul." And for the first time in months, the others answered her with a single word. Amen.
The silence after the search lasted for weeks. The guards spoke little, uneasy in the corridors below. Even the sound of keys scraping against iron seemed hesitant. The sisters sensed the tension and used it. Their stillness became a weapon sharper than rebellion. Work continued, but in every act of servitude they left traces of faith, a cross drawn in spilled water, a psalm whispered into the cloth they washed. They built a hidden world beneath the empire's feet, invisible but alive. One night, while gathering kindling from the furnace hall, Sister Damaris found a narrow passage half blocked by debris. It smelled of dust and age, older than the palace itself. When the guards' steps faded, she and Magdalena cleared it stone by stone, their fingers bleeding from the effort. Behind it lay an archway, sealed, ancient, its surface etched with unfamiliar symbols. When they pressed their ears against the wall, they heard only silence. But in that silence was promise, space, concealment, maybe even sanctuary. Over the next nights, they worked in secret,
Bit by bit, the stones gave way, until at last a small opening appeared. A faint breath of air drifted through, dry but cool. They slipped inside one by one, carrying their makeshift altar, the wax flame wrapped in cloth. The chamber beyond was low, circular, the ceiling carved with faint outlines of wings. Dust coated the floor like ash. It had been sealed for generations. There, in the heart of the empire's darkness, they built their hidden chapel. A fragment of linen became the altar cloth. A broken bowl served as their chalice. From soot and ash, they drew faint crosses along the walls. Each night, they gathered there after the palace slept, kneeling on the cold stone, whispering psalms until dawn's first sound above told them to return. When one of the guards noticed their growing calm, he grew suspicious and followed. But the sisters had learned the rhythm of the palace. They knew when footsteps came, when silence was safe. The guard found nothing, only sleeping captives and dust. Yet from somewhere beyond the walls, he thought he heard singing, faint, distant, like voices carried by the stone itself. He left quickly, never speaking of it again.
The secret chapel became their heart, a pulse hidden beneath marble and empire. Each night, when the palace above sank into silence, they slipped through the broken archway, one by one, carrying what little they had saved from the day. A thread from a servant's robe, a drop of oil, a scrap of parchment stolen from the scribe's waist. Every fragment became sacred. The faint flame they guarded flickered against the walls, illuminating faces hollowed by hunger, but lit with something stronger than fear. Sister Magdalena stood at the center, her hands trembling as she held the crude cross they had fashioned from splintered wood. She no longer looked like the timid novice from Thessaly. The shadows carved her into something fierce, a leader born from suffering. Around her, the sisters knelt in a circle, whispering verses no longer as ritual, but as survival. Each word was a defiance that the empire could not record. One by one, they began to speak their memories aloud, of bells ringing across Greek hills, of bread still warm at dawn, of the voices of their dead. These memories became their psalms. They had no priest, no book, no relics, but each other. When one faltered, another continued. When tears came, no one hid them. Their voices filled the chamber, quiet but unbroken, until the walls themselves seemed to hum with faith. Days turned into months. The guards above noticed their endurance, but could not explain it. They starved them, isolated them, silenced them, yet still the women lived. Some of the younger soldiers whispered that the captives had found favor with unseen spirits. The overseer dismissed it as foolishness, but he began avoiding the lower tunnels at night. Then one morning the sisters returned from labor to find the iron door of their cell locked earlier than usual. No guards spoke. The torches were taken away. Only darkness remained. They sat together, waiting. Hours passed. Then through the silence came a sound, faint, distant, like wind moving through stone. It carried a rhythm too measured to be chance. Someone, somewhere beyond the walls, was echoing their hymn. Sister Magdalena lifted her head. For the first time in a year, she smiled.
The sound returned the next night, soft at first, almost imagined, then steady. It came from behind the far wall of the chapel, through cracks in the ancient stone. The sisters stopped their prayers and listened. It was unmistakable, a voice, a woman's voice, low and fragile, singing the same Latin hymn they had whispered for months. The words trembled, but they were true. Someone else was alive beyond the sealed passage. Sister Magdalena pressed her ear to the wall, her breath shaking.
The others followed, crowding close, their fingers brushing the cold stone. They called softly, not daring to raise their voices. There was no reply, only silence. Then a faint tapping, 3 times, then 2. A signal, the same rhythm they had once used to warn one another of the guards. Their eyes met in disbelief. Perhaps others, hidden deeper in the labyrinth, still endured. When the guards slept, they began working again on the far wall, prying at the cracks with bits of iron scavenged from broken tools. Dust filled the air. Their hands bled, their nails split, but they didn't stop. Each night the tapping grew closer, louder, until one stone shifted under pressure and a breath of air drifted through, dry, ancient, but real. They widened the gap until a hole appeared, large enough for a single hand to reach through. On the other side, another hand met it, thin, trembling, wrapped in linen. No words passed, only touch. Days later, the passage was open enough for one of them to crawl through. Sister Magdalena went first. She found herself in another chamber, nearly identical. Same walls, same marks, same scent of age. But here only 4 women remained. They were captives like them, from another convent, taken years before. Their faces were pale, eyes hollow, but when they saw Magdalena, they smiled as if she were an answer to a prayer long forgotten. That night, the 2 groups joined in one circle. 11 from Thessaly, 4 from elsewhere. 15 voices rising in a single hymn. The sound filled the hidden halls, rising through the cracks of the empire's foundation. And for the first time since their capture, the sisters felt something move inside them that the darkness could not hold, a quiet certainty that their suffering had not been wasted. The light, buried deep, was spreading.
The nights that followed were filled with a new rhythm. 15 voices breathing as one, rising and falling in unison beneath the palace. The sound moved through the corridors like a secret wind, touching the walls and dying only at dawn. The newly found sisters brought with them fragments of prayers, words from hymns long lost, and stories of other captives who had vanished into the labyrinth. Together, they pieced these remnants into something whole, a liturgy built from memory and defiance. Sister Magdalena led them now, her presence calm but unyielding. She no longer prayed for deliverance, she prayed for endurance. Each morning, they returned to their labors, sweeping the endless marble halls, carrying water to chambers filled with light they would never see. The guards watched them with suspicion, noting their quiet unity, but no longer dared to linger near their quarters. Too many swore they heard voices after midnight, voices that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. When rations were cut again, the sisters shared what little remained. Hunger thinned them, yet their eyes grew brighter, fevered with faith. In the secret chapel, they began marking the walls with symbols that only they could read. A bird for each sister still alive, a flame for each who had fallen. Soon the stone was alive with markings, a silent scripture written in their hands. Every night, Magdalena traced her fingers across the carvings, whispering each symbol as if calling the names of saints. Then one morning, 2 guards failed to return from the lower tunnels. Whispers spread among the overseers that they had lost their way, that the corridors had swallowed them. The vizier ordered the passages sealed again, but the sisters knew the truth. The empire's walls had turned against their masters. The palace grew uneasy. Servants crossed themselves when they passed near the lower stairs. That night, as the sisters gathered, the air trembled. From somewhere deep within the stone, a faint hum rose. Not song, not wind, but something in between. It vibrated through the walls, through their bones, through their breath. Sister Magdalena raised her hand for silence. The sound grew stronger, like the earth itself remembering their prayers. And when she spoke, her voice carried no fear, only certainty. He hears us.
The next day, a change swept through the palace like a storm no one could see. Servants whispered of cracks forming in the lower halls, of strange warmth seeping through the marble floors at night. The vizier ordered more guards to patrol the tunnels, but few volunteered. Those who entered returned pale, speaking of voices that did not echo, and of shadows that moved against the light. The sisters knew what it meant. The walls were keeping their secrets now. In the hidden chapel, the air had grown thick, almost alive. The faint hum from the earth below had become a rhythm that pulsed through the stone. The sisters no longer needed to whisper to find one another. They felt each other's presence through that vibration, as if the very foundation of the empire was breathing with them. Their faith had taken root in the palace's bones. Then came the night of the red moon. Light seeped through the cracks in the ceiling, staining the chamber in a dull crimson glow. The sisters gathered in silence. Sister Magdalena placed the wooden cross on the floor and knelt beside it, her shadow stretching across the stone. One by one, they joined her. Their voices rose, soft at first, then growing, their hymn climbing upward through the tunnels like smoke. The sound climbed past sealed doors, through empty corridors, up to the sleeping halls above. Guards stirred from their posts, unsure whether the sound was human or something older. The vizier awoke and sent word to silence the prisoners, but when his men descended, the noise stopped. The torches flickered and died. In the darkness, the guards stumbled, calling to each other, their voices swallowed by the stone. When they returned to the surface, they spoke only of music that had no source. In the chamber below, the sisters sat in stillness, faces glistening with sweat. The air trembled with what they had unleashed. Sister Magdalena looked at the flickering flame at their altar, smaller now, almost gone, and smiled faintly. "It burns enough," she whispered. Around her, the others bowed their heads. The empire slept above them, unaware that beneath its feet something sacred had awakened, something it could neither command nor destroy.
By morning, the palace was restless. The guards avoided the lower stairs, pretending not to hear the faint echoes that lingered beneath the stone. The vizier ordered food withheld again, believing hunger would end the strange disturbances. But even as their bodies weakened, the sisters' eyes burned brighter, their silence heavier than speech. They had become living ghosts within the empire's walls, invisible yet undeniable. That night, the hum beneath the floor returned, deeper now, slower, as though the earth itself was exhaling. The sisters gathered in their hidden chapel. The wax flame had burned down to a pool of hardened gold, but Sister Magdalena lit it again with a splinter from the altar wood. The light shimmered across the walls, revealing what days of carving had made. The chamber was now covered from floor to ceiling with symbols, wings, flames, crosses, circles of light. Every inch told the story of their endurance. Suddenly, a sound came from the outer passage. Het footsteps, heavy and rushed. The sisters froze. The door shuddered under the weight of fists. "By order of the Sultan," a voice shouted, "no prayer will be spoken in these halls again." The lock groaned. Stone dust fell from the ceiling. Sister Magdalena turned to the others and whispered, "Then we shall pray in silence." The words were calm, certain. The door burst open. Torches flared, smoke flooding the chamber. Guards poured in, shouting, their blades drawn. But the sisters did not move. They knelt, heads bowed, hands clasped. The captain barked orders, demanding names, obedience, conversion, anything. No answer came. The silence unnerved him. He struck the floor with his sword, sparks flying, but the women remained still, their faces serene. When he lifted his torch higher, he saw the carvings, hundreds of them, glowing faintly in the flickering light. For a moment, even he hesitated. The walls seemed alive. The air shimmered with heat, though there was no fire. He ordered the chamber sealed, fearing contagion of the spirit he could not understand. As the door slammed shut again, the sisters stayed kneeling, the smoke curling around them like incense. In that moment, beneath the empire's most guarded ground, the forbidden faith lived unbroken, not in words, but in breath.
Days passed in darkness. The torches never returned. The door stayed sealed. The air grew heavy with the scent of smoke and oil, but still the sisters prayed, not aloud, but in rhythm, their breaths rising and falling together like waves against stone. Hunger hollowed them to shadows, yet no one wept. Their silence had become a language that needed no voice. On the third night, a faint light appeared along the wall, not from a torch, but from within the cracks of the carvings themselves. The wax that had once sealed their marks had begun to melt in the warmth of the trapped air, reflecting the last flicker of their altar flame. It spread slowly, turning the walls into a dim constellation. The sisters lifted their faces toward it. Even in the blackness, it looked like dawn. Sister Magdalena knelt before the altar. Her hands trembled as she held the splintered cross, now blackened with soot. Around her, the others swayed in unison, whispering fragments of a hymn too faint for words. Their lips moved as one, and the sound that escaped was barely human, a low hum that rose and filled the chamber, echoing through the sealed corridors above. The stone itself seemed to vibrate. Above ground, guards reported strange tremors, the flicker of lamps, a whispering that came from nowhere. The vizier forbade anyone from entering the lower halls. He ordered the tunnels bricked completely, entombing the women within. The masons worked in silence, uneasy, crossing themselves in secret as they laid the final stones. When the last gap was sealed, the palace fell still again. Below, the sisters felt the final thud as the last stone closed. No air, no sound, only darkness, thick and endless. Sister Magdalena opened her eyes. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Into thy hands," the others answered softly, their words fading with breath. The flame sputtered once, twice, then went out. And in that moment, buried beneath empire, silence, and centuries, their prayer became eternal.
For a long time there was nothing, no sound, no movement, only the stillness of sealed stone. Dust settled over the extinguished flame, coating the carved walls in gray. The sisters' bodies remained where they had knelt, hands clasped, faces lifted as if in mid-prayer. The air grew thin, the silence absolute. In that depth of quiet, the empire above continued its rhythm, wars, feasts, coronations, unaware of the sanctum buried beneath its heart. Seasons turned into years. The marble floors of the palace were repaired, new gardens planted over the hidden chamber. The names of the sisters vanished from ledgers and lists, erased as if they had never existed. But below, where the air had once carried their songs, the carvings endured. Wax hardened over the symbols like amber, preserving the story no historian would write. Then, one night during an earthquake that shook Constantinople, a single stone shifted. The tremor was brief, forgotten by dawn, but deep below, the movement opened a thin crack in the ceiling of the sealed chapel. Air seeped through, faint, cold, alive. It brushed across the faces of the still figures and stirred the dust from their veils. The cross Sister Magdalena had held slipped from her hands and fell, striking the floor with a sound so small it would never be heard by any living ear. Yet in that sound the silence was broken. Rain followed bays later, and through the crack above, drops of water began to fall, striking the floor in slow, steady rhythm. Over time, the chamber filled with moisture, softening the stone, loosening the earth around it. The walls that had been their prison began to yield. Above ground, no one knew. The sultans changed, the viziers died, empires shifted. The palace remained, proud and eternal, or so it seemed. Beneath it, in the hidden hollow of forgotten faith, time worked in silence. The carvings glistened faintly beneath the water's sheen, their symbols now mirrored on the surface. And though no voice prayed there anymore, the room itself seemed to breathe, the last remnant of women who would not bow, waiting to be found again.
Centuries passed. The palace changed masters, rooms renamed, walls rebuilt, but the ground beneath it held its secret. The sealed chamber remained untouched, hidden beneath layers of marble and empire. The water that had seeped through the crack grew into a shallow pool. Algae bloomed where light never reached. The air thickened with age. Still the carvings survived, faint now but legible, their lines softened by time. Then, in the year 1847, during renovations ordered by the Sultan, a team of workmen uncovered a hollow beneath the old council floor. The foreman thought it a drainage fault and sent men down with lamps and ropes. The opening was narrow, the air heavy. When they reached the bottom, their lights flickered across something that froze them mid-step. Rows of stone figures, women kneeling, hands joined, faces turned upward as if caught mid-prayer. For a moment, the workers believed they had stumbled into a crypt. When one of them brushed the nearest figure, the surface crumbled, not stone, but bone covered in centuries of dust. Around the bodies were markings, crosses, wings, and strange symbols carved across every wall. The men whispered hurriedly, crossing themselves. One lifted a small object from the debris, a wooden cross, its edges blackened, the center still smooth from touch. It had survived when everything else had decayed. Word spread through the palace. Officials arrived, scholars, clerics. The chamber was cleared, the remains carefully catalogued and carried away. But when they tried to scrape the carvings from the walls, the stone resisted. The tools broke as if the rock itself refused to be erased again. The Sultan ordered the chamber sealed once more, declaring it cursed ground, unfit for human eyes. The entrance was buried beneath new marble, the memory sealed by decree.
Yet the workers who had entered could not forget. They spoke of whispers that followed them for days, of dreams filled with faint singing. Some refused payment and left the city entirely. Others swore that when they closed their eyes, they still saw the faint light dancing along those carvings, the remnants of prayers that had outlasted empire, echoing through the breath of stone. Decades passed before the chamber was spoken of again. The empire had fallen. The palace turned into a museum of its own ghosts. Tourists walked the marble halls where sultans once ruled, never knowing what slept beneath their feet. Yet in the winter of 1938, during restoration of an old cistern, workers uncovered a forgotten tunnel leading east under the courtyard. The passage was narrow, half-collapsed, the air stale with centuries of silence. Two archaeologists descended with lanterns. The light revealed fragments of masonry, burned timbers, and traces of script worn nearly smooth. They followed the tunnel until it ended at a sealed archway. Its center was marked with a faint symbol, a circle of light surrounded by wings. When they touched the stone, the air stirred, cold and heavy. They broke through carefully, and behind it lay the forgotten chapel. The sight stopped them where they stood. The walls glimmered under the lantern's glow, every inch etched with carvings, crosses, flames, and names scratched in Latin. The water still pooled at the center, reflecting the faint light like a mirror of time. On the far side, half buried in silt, they found the remnants of a small wooden object hardened by age. It was a cross. One of them brushed away the dirt and saw, faintly carved at its base, a word almost lost: Magdalena. They recorded everything in silence. No relics were taken that day. The chamber was measured, photographed, and then closed again, not by command, but by reverence. The younger archaeologist swore he heard a faint echo when he turned to leave, a whisper that might have been water, might have been voices. When they returned to the surface, the sun was rising over the Bosphorus. The city was quiet, unaware that something beneath it had been remembered. The report of their discovery was filed, translated, and archived, unread by most. But within the stone below, where the air never moved, the faint light of their lantern had left its trace, reflected for a moment in the carved wings, as if the prayer of the dead had been answered by the living at last. Years turned into decades once more. The chambers slept beneath the weight of the modern city, untouched, sealed behind the museum's endless corridors. But in 1962, when the foundations of a new exhibition hall were being reinforced, vibrations from the machines shook the old stones again. One of the engineers, tracing an echo in the floor, found a hollow sound beneath his boots. Within days, curiosity led to another excavation, a small one, quiet, unannounced. This time, the air that escaped from the opening was warm, carrying the faint scent of oil and dust. The workers descended carefully, their flashlights cutting narrow beams through the dark. The chapel stood as it had before, silent, glistening, eternal. The carvings had grown fainter, worn smooth by time and moisture, but they were still there. The pool in the center had shrunk to a shallow mirror. When light touched its surface, something shimmered, a faint reflection of faces that weren't their own. They found bones again, arranged neatly, untouched, as if whoever had died there had chosen their place. Among them lay fragments of linen turned to dust, a few rusted links of chain, and the small wooden cross still resting where it had fallen. When one of the men lifted it, the air seemed to change. Not wind, not sound, but a pressure, like the world had paused to listen. The man froze, then gently set it back. They took nothing. No tools struck the walls this time. The site manager ordered it resealed immediately. Some said it was out of respect, others said fear. In the following nights, guards posted near the excavation reported strange things: flickering lights in the tunnels, faint singing that stopped whenever footsteps approached. One man swore he saw movement reflected in the puddles, a shadow of women kneeling, hands joined in prayer. By morning, the passage was sealed again with stone and plaster. The project continued above as if nothing had been found. Yet the engineer, who had first heard the hollow sound, visited the site alone before it closed. He stood on the marble floor, listening. For a long time there was silence. Then, just once, from deep below, came the faintest sound of water falling, slow, measured, like breath.
Decades passed, and the world outside changed beyond recognition. The empire's palaces became archives, its courts became corridors for tourists, its secrets wrapped in glass and labels. But beneath the marble, the chapel endured, untouched by time or light. The air within was heavy now, thick with stillness. The water had dried to dust. Only the carvings remained, faint grooves along the walls softened into whispers. In the spring of 2023, restoration crews reopened a forgotten access shaft beneath the old council hall. Their scanners detected a void, an anomaly that puzzled the engineers. When they broke through, the first breath of air that escaped was warm, carrying a scent like burned wax. As the floodlights flickered on, the room revealed itself once again. The carvings shimmered faintly, glinting under layers of condensation. At the center lay the same small cross, now fused to the stone by centuries of dust and salt. The archaeologists who entered spoke in hushed tones. Their instruments registered no sound, yet the microphones picked up faint vibrations, rhythmic, pulsing, too precise to be random. They searched for the source, but found none. One of them, a woman tracing her hand over the carvings, stopped suddenly. Beneath her touch, the symbols were warm, not just from the lamps, but from within. They documented everything and sealed the entrance once more, promising to return after further study. But when they played back the final audio logs that night, a sound emerged faintly through the static, a chorus of voices, low and distant, singing in Latin. No one could explain it. The recording was archived, marked as interference. Today, visitors walk those halls unaware that beneath their feet, 22 women still kneel in the dark, their names lost, their prayers unending. The empire that silenced them has turned to dust, but their faith endures, carved into stone that refuses to forget. When the wind moves through the cracks of the old palace walls, those who listen closely say they can still hear it, a faint hymn rising through the marble, the last song of the nuns who would not break.